let's go now to, on this list, David Madland from the Center for American Progress. For David.
Thanks. Appreciate it. The name of the report, that's the future of worker voice and power that Harold mentioned, so feel free to take a look. So I think, to me, hopefully my role is to sort of provide a little bit of a vision of where we might want to go, what ideally we'd try to achieve, and then talk a little bit about some of the steps that we could possibly take at a state and local level to get towards there. So first, I think we need to recognize some of the failings of the existing system. Why do we have the kinds of problems we do? And I'm especially thinking about our labor law, not just our employment law, but our labor law. And so probably all familiar with some of the core problems with our labor law, that people have tended to focus on the very weak rights and enforcement of those rights, the incredibly low penalties, non-existent penalties for companies that violate them, et cetera. And that's sort of where most labor law discussions have focused. I think that's sort of a pretty incomplete picture of what's so weak about our current law and how it prevents us from really tackling precarious work, in addition to sort of much more general problems of wage stagnation and record high inequalities. So one of the core problems of the current law is that it channels almost most all discussions about wages and benefits to the level of the employer or below. So you're trying to discuss wages and you want to have a negotiation with your employer, well, you end up negotiating for a very small group of workers at a small part of a firm at best. That leaves out a lot of people, especially sort of the precarious workers we're talking about here. But in the U.S., it's less than 7% of the private sector is organized. So right there, 97% of the people we're not able to negotiate in a collective way for. That system also not only does it leave people out, but it inherently creates conflict. Employers don't want to have their workers be unionized because they think they're going to face higher costs than their competitors. So they're going to fight like crazy, which leads to conflict. And not only is that bad for those workers, it's also bad for the employers, because sort of any of the gains of collective bargaining in terms not just of wages, but in terms of higher levels of productivity are oftentimes contingent upon a productive working relationship between employers and employees. And so our system is oriented against that. So I think when we think about where we want to go, we want to expand well beyond that current system. And one of the first things we'd want to do is think about how we bargain at a much higher level beyond just the individual employer, so that we could really have bargaining at either a regional level, a sector level, or an industry-wide level, where you can raise wages for everyone involved in that sector, not just a narrow group of people. The second thing you want to do, so that on its own would be a huge achievement, but I think it's a pretty fragile achievement on its own, because you need to find ways to support that level of bargaining. Among those, of course, you would need sort of the real rights that the traditional labor law policy has focused on, so that workers have the ability to join some organizations and don't fear incredible repercussions if they choose to organize them. But you also would want to focus on kind of multiple forms, I think, of worker organization at the workplace level. Because if you have this really high-level bargaining, you need some ways to channel that in the workplace and for workers to have some actual voice at their individual workplace. And the last thing you need, from a policy perspective, is the state actively being on the side of channeling people into worker organizations. So what I've described at some level is relatively common-ish in Europe and much of the world, but it's crumbling pretty much everywhere. it's fallen apart. Unions are in really, sharp decline in membership, and because of the sharp decline in membership, they can't hold together this bargain very well. Most of the world, the few places that it exists, there is a level of state support and exactly the mechanisms we can talk about, but that encourages membership. And so I think we need to take that challenge seriously, because otherwise you are stuck with a problem of free riders benefiting from this sort of social bargaining, but not having an incentive to pay and to join an organization. So I think we want the state at a high level to be encouraging membership. And that's, all of these things are sort of high level and abstract. So what would that really look like in the ground, especially in this environment where at best we are going to not lose too much at a federal level? So I think this kind of idea for policy, actually, one of the advantages is a lot more of it can be done at the state and local level than the traditional labor law agenda. So first, this high-level bargaining at sort of a sector level or regional level is allowed by the law, and in fact, sort of encouraged, and we have lots of examples of it. In fact, the Fight for 15, at some level, especially their success in New York State, was done through a wage board where some levels almost tripartite, where there was a member of labor, a member of the government, a member of the business community, looking at the industry, the fast food industry, and deciding what wages for that occupation and industry could be. A number of other states have wage boards, and I think you could even really not just limit yourself to that even conception. You could go further. I think you could even have potentially wage scales within an industry. So the next element so the other two elements are, two of the elements that I talked about are really pretty hard to do at a state level. The real rights, that's sort of hard, and the multiple forms of workplace organization, I think is harder. But the last thing, the state actively being on the side of worker organization, is something a lot of states are already doing, or states and local governments are already doing. Jose in the Workers' Defense, I don't think he mentioned this element of the Better Builders Council, where where is Jose? I saw him a second ago, but so they have not only created this sort of certification process to ensure that the jobs are done in certain ways, that the industry operates in certain ways. They have gotten the city of Austin to sort of support it and give companies that follow it a boost in the regulatory process to get their permitting faster. So I think that's a way where the government is on the side of encouraging the organization. Similarly, with a lot of the enforcement models that Janice Fine was mentioning, lots of cities, mostly West Coast cities, are starting to think about how they're to do the enforcement well. They know they can't do it just through traditional governmental measures. They need on-the-ground partners, and they are helping, in some ways, build those organizations. And so I think that kind of model fits. So do sort of training-based models. You can think of in Washington State, they, I think in the home care industry, require worker training, and that training is largely provided by Taft-Hartley Fund, that's joint employer and labor run, and from that, that's a platform that the union recruits members and does quite well recruiting new members there. And the last sort of element that I think could fit here at a state and local, or at least one additional element that I think could fit at a state and local level, is in terms of benefits provisions. You could think of, especially for the precarious workforce that does not have these labor, or does not have typical benefits that we get through the workplace, retirement, et cetera. You could think of having the state be on the side of encouraging that benefit and providing a role for work organizations to ensure that workers can access those benefits and the benefits are high quality. And so with that, I will end and save some time for questions and answers.
Advocates for every day it melts. So Kathy.